what we wanted to cover today was a high level of how alliances and the indirect go-to-market strategy and model have grown in importance and are having an impact in terms of how the monetization of cloud solutions is occurring out in the space. Secondly, bring you some perceptions from a couple different views. The hyperscaler view out into the ecosystem, so the biggest platforms, how they're working with partners, what they're looking for going forward. And lastly, what are some of the challenges and opportunities for hyperscalers, SI, ISVs, MSPs working together in the market, and how is GenAI, disrupting that and also creating a lot of opportunity for them to work and grow their businesses together more going forward. So I'm Allan Krans. I'm the principal analyst in the cloud and software practice here at TBR. I'm joined by a senior analyst on my team, Catie Merrill. She focuses a lot on the big hyperscale platform providers, but also has coverage of Oracle and some of the data and ISV coverage within the overall TBR stream of research. So a lot of the graphs that you're going to see, this is an early view of a new study that Catie and I have been working on, the Cloud Voice of the Partner, that looks at the ecosystem and gets direct feedback from the large hyperscale platforms, AWS, Microsoft, Google in particular, what they're looking for in terms of the ecosystem around their platform and their offerings. But then also goes back out to some of the partners that are participating in those ecosystems. So ISVs, SIs, and MSPs, all those business models, it's tough to target just a single vendor. A lot of them are doing multiple different business models and participating in different ways within the ecosystem. But those are all kind of the broad categories of vendors that are providing us feedback, both through the survey responses that you'll see in the graphs. But there's also a series of interviews that we've had with folks to really kind of go deep and get some of the qualitative. So we've included some of that at the bottom of these slides as well. But this is really very early. We just finished the fielding for the study. We plan to publish it next month. So this is our first reaction. We've pulled out some of the more interesting tidbits to kind of summarize what we think is going on in terms of the state of the cloud ecosystem and how GenAI is playing a role in terms of changing that market. So to take a step back in terms of the overall role of the indirect go-to-market model and what we've seen that having an impact on in terms of the cloud space overall, I think it's really been a multi-year evolution of, started a little bit before the pandemic, and it got a little bit of a boost in terms of just direct growth, demand for solutions that were remote. But really the trend has been more alliance-driven sales and revenue growth. The pure consumption, the pure kind of lift and shift that occurred in the early days of cloud has been slowing down for quite some time. And we're getting into those types of workloads, services, and use cases that it's not just technology, it's a business change for a lot of these organizations to get to the point where they're ready to invest in new emerging solutions that are cloud-based. And so that brings in a lot of different actors, more than just an AWS, more than just a Microsoft, to provide the capacity for those types of solutions. There's an ISV layer, there's an infrastructure layer for sure, but a lot of other services and relationships in terms of consuming that solution and supporting it for the long term. So it's been changing for quite some time. And we highlighted that most recently. We published a cloud go-to-market benchmark that segmented the direct versus indirect revenue streams for the leading cloud providers. And over the past year, the revenue growth rate through indirect channels has been 2x the direct one. So for the largest providers that we're looking at that on a quantitative perspective, the growth rate is double. And we started to see some of that through the survey feedback that we're showing here as well, where almost 60% of respondents noted that the indirect channels are growing faster than their overall corporate rate of growth. So it's leading and a source of revenue growth for their organization. And then, 14% said it's about the same. So when you combine those two up, more than 70% are looking at indirect channels as either sustaining their corporate revenue or leading in terms of actually monetizing in the space. And I think that speaks to a lot of the growing focus and importance that we've heard through briefings and all of the program announcements that we've been tracking over the past couple of years. It really is not, it's not just for marketing's sake to put a good face to the ecosystem. They're driving revenue growth and driving the business as a result of these indirect efforts and investments. So there are real dollars that are supporting a lot of this. And it came out, I think, primarily in the interview where a lot of the sales organizations, not always, in terms of speeding up the sales cycle, going direct. There continues to be a contingent within a lot of those organizations that's a big part of how they're making money and how their legacy has come up in terms of driving the go-to-market model. But there are those growing proof points within most of the organizations that we spoke with to advocate for more investment in partner resources, increasing incentives and alignment with the sales team to work with partners as part of a bigger portion of their business. So there has been a turning of the tide in terms of the perception of partner programs and that go-to-market model and the role that it can have for the overall growth. So I'll hand it over to Catie to go through a little bit more of the detail in terms of how GenAI is having an impact on the market as we see it.
Yeah, thanks, Alan, and hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So now that we've set the stage a little bit, shifting gears, I'll spend a few minutes going through some of the partner perception feedback we're getting, both from the hyperscalers themselves and then the partners of those hyperscalers as well. So looking more broadly, where the partners of the cloud providers, so that's ISVs, that's managed services, and that's SIs, where they see the opportunity, which hyperscaler is going to drive the most growth for their business in the next few years. And you can see the results here. They really aren't all that surprising, right? You see Microsoft on top, followed by AWS and GCP. Given Azure's ties to the applications business and the product and pricing synergies that Microsoft can deliver, that's going to be very attractive to partners. And in general, you do see them operating a much more centrally run go-to-market structure, though we do see AWS starting to shift in that direction as well. And through these discussions we've been having, we've gotten a lot of feedback, though I will say more dependent on the type of SI, whether they're more advisory and BPO versus ITO. But in general, some of the SIs have been telling us that the competition and the overlap with AWS's own teams is diminishing as well. And then for the other two, Google is certainly making up ground, very strong AI capabilities. Partners seem optimistic about that, but still struggling, right, for the enterprise mindshare that AWS and Azure have. And then lastly, Oracle. For the purposes of this study, we're really just focusing on the infrastructure side of the business, and it's still very early days for them as a cloud infrastructure provider. I think some of the more interesting results are on the right-hand side of the slide, where we're really just focusing on AI and how partners are thinking about the success of the different hyperscalers' AI offerings and the potential that they have. What stands out here is really more the nuance by partner type. So you look at Microsoft, of course, they're a platform company and they've always been a platform company. They have the tools and the capabilities for the ISV partners to work around and integrate with, to build on top of. But you see SIs showing a lot of optimism with AWS when it comes to the AI-related growth opportunity. I think, despite some talk in the market we've heard based on last quarter, obviously Azure and GCP, they do have some clear advantages when it comes to AI, including their history with AI workloads, obviously the Azure OpenAI partnership. But I think what we're seeing in these results here too is a recognition that there's still so much opportunity on-prem, right, that has to get to the cloud. In our research, we find AI workloads landing disproportionately in the public cloud. So I think for a GSI, they're really looking at things that drive foundational revenues, like an infrastructure migration, and that's really where AWS shines, right? And the services attached that they can get on that. So I think we're seeing some of the AI optimism really reflected in AWS's infrastructure business, and a recognition that the reality is that the data has to be in the cloud. For Google, again, very full stack approach to AI. If you're accounting for the TPU infrastructure and Gemini as really a frontier model, then you have these applications like Agent Space, which many GSIs are integrating with now. And it's also part of a very clear vision, right? Agent Space to bring GenAI to the enterprise. I think another piece too we're seeing is the level of industry customization. We find GCP is one of the few that has really directly optimized their AI capabilities for certain industries. Retail and healthcare are very strong, and we find many GSIs are starting to actually more actively recommend Google Cloud as the preferred provider to customers in those industries. And then quickly, Oracle, again, as a general purpose cloud, you're not going to have it up there with the rest. But I think one of the things we're looking at too in terms of growth is the migration opportunity around Oracle database, particularly as other clouds outside OCI are now involved, and the opportunity to bring enterprise data with Oracle closer to the AI development tools that the other hyperscalers provide and all the developer mindshare surrounding that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. It kind of becomes a question of getting partners really invested outside their core SaaS application domain, right? And how do you appeal, like in the case of Oracle, to the GenAI decision makers as opposed to kind of the old world relational database experts? So moving on a bit to the other angle, and what are the cloud providers thinking about in terms of partnerships, and what are they looking for? So the feedback that we did on this, both in the survey and certainly in the discussions we've been having, was very clear that skills and certifications trumps everything else, because ultimately that's what builds trust with the client. But it also kills trust if it's not there, right? And it's hard to get back. So while pricing and commitments and all these other factors certainly matter, the talent piece is really crucial. And it's also a factor in terms of where the investment is going to flow. We also found another big priority for the cloud vendors going forward is mostly just increasing the breadth of partners that they work with and bringing new partners, including many of these AI ISVs on board. Structure and incentives and kind of re-tiering, like that's all still going on. But for the hyperscalers, I think a lot of that work has been done in terms of, how do we make it easier for an ISV to spin up services and vice versa as services vendors try to explore more products. So, making it easier for partners to engage in multiple ways and not boxing them in. That's been going on for a while now. So especially with AI, I think we see the focus shifting really on getting these new types of partners in the program, and not just that, but getting them listed on the marketplace as a route to market as well. And marketplaces was a big piece of this research as well. So feel free to follow up with us after if there's interest. And one last comment on this slide, just in terms of the actual partner types and kind of where the cloud providers are focusing. Right now, it's a lot of ISVs, but you continue to see them emphasize the GSIs down the road. I think there's been a lot of speculation on the impacts of AI, right, and services, but from the perspective of the hyperscaler right now, unlocking new use cases, getting workloads to the cloud, these hyperscalers who are grasping so much of the market is really the top priority, and especially with the pressure to deliver the business value around AI. That said, we're still seeing a big emphasis on the AI ISVs, no surprise there. And that includes the foundation model providers, the Anthropics and Coheres of the world. As these kind of model performance benchmarks, they're only saturating, right? So they're not differentiating on their own. It's really how can they integrate within the ecosystem. In our study, data management ISVs were up there as well in terms of another focus area for the cloud vendors. And I'd say, compared to this time, like last year, data GSIs specifically seem to be recognizing more the role that data is playing in AI and GenAI. And then lastly, managed services was called out as another big focus area as well. So hopefully that gives you some color on kind of the partner perception and some specifics we're seeing with the vendors. With that, Alan, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Catie. So here we'll dive into some of the challenges that were noted. So I'll kind of walk through not only the graph at right, but also some of the context for what we picked up on in the interviews and the other research that we're doing. So I think it all kind of aligns to tell a broader story about how these things are taking place within the context of a broader organization and some of the challenges that result from that. So first, the margin and profit pressure. I think this manifests in a number of different ways. One is the existing business for most of the participants. They have an existing, direct sales business set of offerings, and so these partner and ecosystem investments exist within that broader context. And certainly with the cloud market overall, there's been a renewed or new focus on profit over continued growth, or in the absence of the same level of growth, profits become more of an important metric and focus point from a financial perspective. And so when you look at justifying some of the things that need to go into supporting programs, doing joint training initiatives, go to market, when for a lot of vendors it is more of an uncertain space or not their first original go-to-market motion, that can be challenging. So justifying those investments, I think, was something that we heard in a lot of the interviews that can be a challenge. And especially with, I think this is where it intersects with AI, where a lot of the customer service relationship, Q&A type roles, anything that can be automated, including interaction between partners, is sometimes going that direction. And it's just more challenging to develop the type of relationships and trust and working joint business in the absence of the type of models where you have more headcount and resources to do that. The other thing that came up was, a lot of times these programs are run out of marketing. And that has been an area where, in terms of reducing headcount, reducing costs, there's been a focus there. So continuing to, sustain some of these efforts or grow them or initiate them in an environment where you have smaller marketing, kind of thinking about the joint solutioning, the messaging, and all those inbound funnel type activities, that came up as a challenge. Secondly, the commercial models. I think there's been so much shift and anticipated change and beginnings of change occurring there that we've heard. We've had a lot of conversations with some of the SIs recently, and just thinking about things like outcome-based pricing, about subscription services as a subscription, those types of models which aren't intuitive, aren't part of the way that services have been monetized for decades or for centuries, looking at some of those ways that they can align with the type of solutions that are being deployed. Even before we get into AI and GenAI, the mixture of subscription and consumption and multiple parties as involved in that. There's already been thoughts about that. So packaging things that are more durable, can scale, that's been a growing focus on whether you're an ISV or a MSP or an SI, and whether you're monetizing that or just using it for your own internal operations. Those commercial models and those decisions, I think, are becoming more challenging and nuanced and uncertain. So I think everyone's trying to figure out the right model for their own business, and then how that best aligns with, at least one, if not multiple different parties that are contributing to some of these solutions is a big focus and area of uncertainty that's, shows up as a challenge when we look at it. Last one to touch on, I think it's related to some of the margin pressure and some of what partners want in terms of good relationships with other vendors is, that they know our business, they know our solutions, and that goes the other way as well. So that there's familiarity, they can position it correctly, and message in the way that is consistent with what the vendor themselves would say if they were in the room, and they're not always in the room. So, I think that training and then having the skills to deliver on projects that are not just pilots, but really, scalable production cases, that continues to be a challenge. So that joint training and certification is an important part of those. So we touched on trust a little bit. It's one of those things where in TBR's, this is not our first partner study. We have an ongoing stream of research with Voice of the Partner that focuses mainly on the SI perspective of the ecosystem in the market. And the concept of trust has been part of that feedback survey, really comes out highly required and noted as something that forms a good relationship. And so with this, especially with the in-depth interviews, kind of dove into that a little bit more to understand such a broad term that what's really going on within that overall umbrella that makes people note it so widely as something that forms a successful relationship. And so, part of it was that knowledge of your partner, being able to accurately represent them in the right circumstances, and kind of working backward from that customer engagement, the right solution for the customer, taking a step back to have the right participants, the right types of solutions, the right types of services at each step of the way, so that I think ultimately that's really what trust envelops, is doing the right thing for the customer. And there's just so many different multiple parts of that stack to stay up to date on, to having a working relationship with, to not overstepping in terms of capabilities or overcommitting, and having your partner be sure that won't happen, and that there's the ability to really deliver on the promises that are made both to your partner as well as to the joint customer. And then having predictability throughout, not just at an executive level, but with the sales teams, knowing that the right sales incentives are in place. So there's not a spiff to push a certain solution over others. It really is based on the best interest of the customer, the joint business together. And having that underlie, I think when you look at kind of the mid-tier of everything on the graph to the right about what drives a successful alliance, without having some of those things, trust is really, those are examples of trust when we look at what shows up as important. And then I'll highlight on the bottom of the graph some of the things that are more tactical. In some ways, I think they're kind of table stakes expectations, but you could have those, joint CRM integration, availability of sales support. But if there's not the solution alignment and the kind of the joint commitment to the customer, it doesn't really make a difference in terms of what's a successful alliance over something that is just kind of a paper alliance, or something that is only anecdotally part of the overall go-to-market strategy and their ecosystem approach. So come back to trust. I didn't really want to do that, but when we looked at the survey and had these discussions, I think shows up in a lot of different ways that actually are important in terms of how to work better within the ecosystem. All right, so that's kind of that top level highlight for what's coming out of the Voice of the Partner research. Again, we're going to publish this in about a month. So we'll go much deeper and elaborate on these themes, as well as add in new angles and cuts in terms of the different segments of the market that we surveyed and spoke with. But now I'll hand it over to Haley to open it up to Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allan. Thank you, Catie. Our first question is, what impact do multi-party alliances have on partner strategies?
Catie, you want to lead in with this one?
Yeah, sure. This is something that has come up through several interviews that we've done. I think the feedback we're seeing is that it's still very early days for this structure where, most commonly you're bringing in a hyperscaler, an ISV, and a GSI. That said, there's a lot of optimism around it. I think that the big challenges are they're simply just hard to orchestrate, right, and align in terms of structure. So provided, you can kind of break down those barriers, I think the growth potential from that structure could be pretty significant. We've seen a lot of examples in the industry actually already, including with Deloitte and Google Cloud and ServiceNow. And that brings up something else we're looking at, which is A to A, Google's agent-to-agent framework, and how things like that can provide some standardization, right, in connecting different agents. So it'll be interesting to see as well how those kind of frameworks can help facilitate that that engagement model as well. But I think for now, we're still seeing it be very early days for the multi-party structure.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is part of the power of that is in the interviews that we had, just seeing when there's more than one partner brought in and they're able to, again, act in the best interest of the customer, having the right solution with the right services wrapper, it really makes a more compelling offer. And the close rates go up, the size of the deals go up, and I think it really gets to that trust aspect of when you can get 3 vendors or more working together in an aligned way. It's pretty powerful in terms of those deals that they're part of.
Great. The next question that we have is, what factors need to occur for more GenAI growth?
Yeah, I can start here. I think that the use cases that not only save money, but also have a net business impact, a positive impact. I think those are the things that there's a lot of searching for right now. I was just listening to Salesforce's earnings, and they're noting about how they're able to, using their agentic AI, have a follow-up to every prospect in their pipeline. And that just due to scale, due to the limited human resources that they had previously, they just couldn't reach every prospect in the pipeline. And so there's a lot of undiscovered opportunity, in addition to the cost savings that they're noting using some of those solutions internally and part of their margin push and really increasing profitability by containing operating expenses. So I think more of those use cases that not only save money, but also have an impact in terms of the top line and the overall business. They're being developed, but I think it's just taking more time for them to come out at scale and really convince some of those larger production workloads to go forward with those investments.
Great. And we have one more question in the queue. If anybody listening has any additional questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. We've got a few more minutes that we can allocate for some questions here. But our last one for now is, should partners be exclusive? Recommend one provider over others?
Yeah, I think it's a balance. Again, I think it goes back to some of those joint training, joint certifications, successful use cases and case studies that apply to industries where you have those partners working together to drive real business results. It's tough because you want to have a whole lay of the landscape in terms of what's available from a technology perspective. But in the end, it's about knowing the tools that you can implement successfully, and there's a track record there. So those things are tough to overcome. So I think what we've seen in a lot of the interviews is, providing some choice to the end customer for tools that they've either currently using, have some familiarity with, that they want to include in terms of a screen or a set of possibilities, and having partners be flexible in terms of looking at not just the same partner that they've always worked with for a certain piece of the stack, but looking at new things or different vendors that they're not as familiar with. So I think some level of flexibility is really most desirable, especially when you look at it from the end customer perspective.